So, tonight's talk is mostly going to be focused on the Navajo Diné weaving traditions, and hopefully Mark will put a little bit of plug in for our Pueblo friends as well. Without further ado, my good friend Mark Winter, textile collector, dealer, scholar, author, honestly the most passionate person in the American Southwest textile world that I know of. So it's just been a thrill for me to have worked with him on this exhibition and have grown my body of knowledge immensely. And I should mention that he and Linda have also been running the Totalina Trading Post for now 28 years. Sadly, that has come to an abrupt end.
Yeah, yep. That's another story.
But that's another story for another day. But no, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you, Mark.
You guys aren't sick of me yet, huh? So anyway, as you see, we have a whole new group of stuff to go through today. And we did the Saltillos first, and then the Rio Grandes, and then the slave blankets last night. And so now we're going to talk about, the mainstay of the Southwestern textile sort of business and world, which is Navajo. And so the Navajo blankets are generally considered the most highly sought after and most expensive textiles in the world now. You can literally buy a tapestry that's on the wall of King Arthur's court that's 700 or 800 years old for less money than you can buy a Navajo blanket for.
Quality matters.
Yes, and it's pretty amazing. And so the first U.S. surveying expedition, we take over the Southwest, the land we're sitting in right now, under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And basically we sort of prompted a war with Mexico. In Washington, they decided they'd hire Zachary Taylor and just march down to Mexico City and beat up a lot of Mexicans. And basically, when they got there, we took half the country. And that included California, Utah, parts of Texas, New Mexico. And so that's how we got this wonderful thing. And the thing I always like to point out, and I got in a lot of trouble doing this, is if you think gold was discovered in California less than a year later, is an amazing coincidence. Manifest destiny, of course. And so the United States blockaded the San Francisco harbor when we found the gold was there. So Sutter's Mill is another one of those great American myths. And I made the mistake of saying that when I did a talk at the Oakland Museum once. Some guy came over and just started blasting me. Young man? I'm going, I'm not that young. He says, I don't know what book you've been reading, but you're totally wrong about all this. And so he started just blasting me for saying it, and I'm going, well, I don't know what book you've been reading either, but if you believe in coincidences, that's great. So there's this little guy standing there with a hat on, kind of scruffy and everything. He just looked like the classic anthropologist, archaeologist guy you could ever imagine. He was just standing listening to this conversation, and after he heard enough of it, he finally said, my name's Robert Ryle Miller, and I'm the head California historian, and he's absolutely right. So that quieted my competition. So anyway, so today we're going to talk about just a second about Pueblo weaving, and the Anasazi actually designed, developed would be the proper word, of what's called the primitive upright frame loom. And here's a little Navajo version made by one of our weavers at Totalina. The frame was made by her husband, and she did the weaving on it. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about how it's done in case there's any questions. But it was developed from a backstrap loom, and so this is called a fixed rod. And so you see the foundation is strung back and forth between the rod that's wrapped top and bottom. And then once that's done, the piece is set into a frame and tensioned. and then the weaver sits in front of the piece and weaves. So even the biggest pieces or anything we will see today, or everything, 9 by 12s, 10 by 15s, are all made on basically the exact same loom. And so the technique made is called weft face tapestry. The foundation, the strings that run vertical, are called the warp. What is put in is called the weft, hence the term weft face tapestry, because the weft is packed down and completely conceals the warp. That's how all these blankets are made here today. And so once they have a spindle, this is kind of a little shorty, but they'll take this and they'll card the wool out with either, sometimes it's with, I've seen really wonderful early Navajo cards that had like thistles in them. And so the thistles would help straighten out the fibers. The idea of the carding and combing is to align the fibers. And then they're spun, and they're spun 2 times. The first spinning Navajos use gives a kind of light, thick, fluffy spin. And from that, they spin it down very fine to, depending on whether it's super fine or heavy, whatever weight she wants. But it's always done 2 times. And the Navajo spindle, the ladies will sit and they will literally pull it up their hip. And so all Navajo hand spinning is what's called Z-twist. And that's the twist that you get when you pull it that way. So whether a Navajo youth is right-handed or left-handed, it doesn't matter. Their mother or grandmother is going to teach them to spin it right-handed. And that's always, always, always. I've never seen a variation in that. So then to separate the warps, because to do the weaving, you separate one set of warps and then the other sets of warps. The one that, the rod that's wrapped there is called the heddle, and the little one kind of behind it is called the shed, and they were put in an opposite warp. So depending on which they'll pull forward, they bring one set of warps, the other set of warps, and then as they just lay the wefts in, it automatically makes it a weave. Once they stretch it, which you can see there, they put in what's called a batten, and this is inserted and then turns so the weaver can get her fingers in to do that, to do it. And then once the threads are laid in there, they pat it down with a comb. And the tools are actually made often by the husbands of the weavers, or we have very specific tool makers that are very popular with us, and so we sell those in the store, as well as the weavers can get them from themselves and the people that make them. So, any questions about that before we go on further? Anybody want to come up and try it? Okay. So, anyway, so the size of a piece is determined before it's woven. So this piece would be as big as the frame is that you see, but a larger piece, the frame becomes much bigger, wider, whatever they're really looking for. But so the size is determined first, and then the weaving is filled in, and lo and behold, we have a blanket. And so the Anasazi developed it. The Pueblo Indians, which are really, the Anasazi are ancestor in Pueblo, so the Pueblo started using the loom before the Spanish arrived. And so we don't know exact dates because there was nobody there keeping track. But the Pueblos wove primarily what were called mantas that were wove generally because of how the way the loom works, they wove them wider than long. And so where they could sit and weave, and so they did what were called mantas. And the mantas were usually either brown and white. And the early Pueblos sort of cursed themselves because they had storehouses full of mantas. And the Spanish were so overwhelming with their guns and their horses and all the things that they had with them that the Pueblos offered the Spanish hundreds of mantas that they had in storehouses. And so the Spanish thought that was a fairly cool idea. So they dictated that every Pueblo family would produce 1 to 2 mantas per year for the Spanish king. And so what started out as a tribute, as a gift, became a tribute. So it did little to inspire good weaving that they had to give them away all the time. So mostly those textiles were made fairly plain, like I said, either brown or white, and usually they could be either cotton or wool, depending on. They didn't have wool before the Spanish arrived, so they earlier were cotton, later became wool. One thing the Pueblos could do to personalize the pieces was embroider them, and the Spanish allowed them to do that and to keep, and so they never really wanted the embroidered pieces because they were kind of native design. And so there's a really nice display of early 19th century mantas. I think there's 5 of them in there, and they're shown from different pueblos, and they're identified as such. This is another one that is probably either Jemez Pueblo or maybe Acoma. And so here we show the shape of the manta. This is white cotton, and this has been embroidered with wool in really basically prehistoric style designs. And so this is, when they're fancied up like this, they're usually, I'll get you in 1 second, usually they're made for ceremonial purposes. And so this is what we call a kachina cape. So the kachinas wore these. Sir?
Is prehistoric used to mean before the Spaniards got here?
Yes.
Because mostly in my head, when you say prehistoric, I see dinosaurs.
Well, prehistoric time lasted a long time. And so, and it,
People saying pre-Columbian.
well, it's 6 of one, half a dozen or the other, yeah. But so as long as you know when I say prehistoric, that was before they started recording history. So, and pre-Columbian could be pre-Columbus. So I don't dispute that at all, that's fine. But I'm using the word slightly differently than you might be used to.
I think you should hold this up so we can all see the backside too. That's pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah, you can see where the embroidery attached it. And so that's where the wefting that they were embroidering it with just ended up showing. But you know, here's what happens is when you see it makes a little more sense when you see it on. It's a little small for me, unfortunately. Linda looks much better in this than I do. And by the way, this is my lovely wife, Linda, who'll be helping me today.
I don't see any lazy lines on that. Is it?
Pueblos, the term lazy line was a Pueblo term for the derogatory kind of dig you term because the Pueblo Indians wove straight across back and forth, okay? The Navajos wove as far as they could comfortably reach on the same loom, repositioned them loom or themselves and wove, so they were basically woving sort of in sections. So a lazy line should technically be called a sectional weaving line. And so some of the Navajos don't like that term lazy line because first it was a Pueblo term and it was trying to be a little bit of a dig at the Navajos. One thing we know for sure, Navajos are not lazy at the loom. So anyway, I was supposed to bring a few more Pueblo blankets. I forgot. So, but there's a beautiful display of, I think, 5 of them in the museum that shows you some of the different designs that the different Pueblos came up with. Okay, but let's remember the shape. Like the Hispanic blankets were woven longer than wide. The loom here was easier to weave across to something wider than long because it kept you from having to reach too high. So most of the early pieces that came off of the loom were wider than long. Okay, so anyway, sometime around, it's again a speculated thing. It used to feel that when the Pueblo Revolt happened in 1680 and the Spanish came back in 1693, they didn't learn to give up their brutality against the Pueblos. So a lot of Pueblo Indians moved to west. And so there's a whole group that lived near Hopi called Hopi Tewa, and Tewa was the language, one of the languages used by the Rio Grande weavers, but there's a whole group of them that moved there. And so early historians used to feel that it was probably around 1693, early 1700s that the Navajos learned to weave. Joe Ben Wheat, who was really the head scholar of Navajo weaving, felt it was earlier, because by around 1700 or so, they're described as, doing excellent weaving, and he didn't think they could have become such pros at it in such a short period of time. So he pushed that date back to about 1650 or so, where he felt the Navajos adapted to the loom and started doing weaving. And they stole sheep, and so they had from Spanish and Pueblos, and so they had weaving material, and the rest is history. So anyway, the first real known distinctive type of blanket is what is called the first phase chief's blanket. And in the late 18th century, it's kind of a long story, I'm not going to bore you guys all with it, but it ended up in January of 1805 being a Spanish punitive expedition that chased a bunch of Navajos way up in Canyon de Chelly. The northern canyon of Canyon de Chelly is called Canyon de Muerto, which is the Canyon of Death. And so that's the canyon that the Navajos retreated up in. The Navajos put their women and children and old men up in a cave up on the side of the canyon, and then they retreated back up the canyon, drew the Spanish up, and then disappeared in the rocks and everything. And so the Spanish were going back out. Again, this is January 1805, and this was reported by the Spanish how it happened, but they were going back out and they heard a baby crying, realized that they'd put their women and children and old people up in this cave, and so they slaughtered 115 Navajos and took 33 slaves, and that was January of 1805. A trader from the reservation by the name of Sam Day discovered that he was going on the myths and rumors that existed, went looking for it, and he found it in the early 1900s. He found the spot, and he found the skeletal remains of all the Navajos, and draped around those skeletal remains were blankets. And so those are called the Massacre Cave blankets, and so those are the first truly dated Navajo blankets that we have, because we know they are from January 1805. In that group is a piece about this big of a Navajo first phase chief's blanket. And so we know that was a style by January of 1805 in its fully developed form. That would probably push it back 25, 50 years from that period. But we really don't know. We just know that there was that piece found there.
Were the Spanish uninterested in taking the blankets?
They really never,
didn't want
they
to
just
lose
wanted to slaughter them all. They kind of really didn't seem to care. I'm sure they were sort of bloody, but I wasn't there. I don't know the answer to that. It's a thought. Maybe some did. We just don't know. It was never recorded. So anyway, there's only a small handful of Navajo first phase chief's blankets. And we maybe have all seen the Antiques Roadshow, where the old guy who was a relative, he claimed, of Kit Carson's and stuff, and he got told that blanket was now bringing about $500,000. And so this is a Navajo first phase chief's blanket. And so it's beautiful brown churro wool stripes, brown and white, and then it has beautiful indigo blue. Every one of these is this exact same mathematical layout, where you see 4 groups of double blue bands and the same number of brown and white stripes. There's only one that varies. And there's probably 35 or 40 of these in existence. I'm sure there's some hidden somewhere. The Antiques Roadshow, mentioning that they are worth $500,000, brought a couple out of the woodwork. Obviously. We bought one in Indiana that the people had it. The family was a military family, and they've had it in their family about 125 years. And the son saw the Antiques Roadshow, and he was sitting one night watching TV, and he got the blanket out and he laid it out. His mom had it in her closet, and he watched it 3 times, and he goes, "My God, our blanket looks." He went and he called his girlfriend first and said, "I think we got something valuable." Then he woke up his mom and dad, and they all thought cool, and they called the Antiques Roadshow, and they called Linda and I, and we went to Indiana and bought it, and that's the last one we found. But here we go. We'll just show you this idea. And these are beautifully fine, and the wool is just gorgeous. But here's the idea. I'll just give it a little walk back here. So, yes, you can touch it. I saw the look in her eye. What?
What kind of wool typically?
Churro.
It would be churro that early?
Oh, yeah, pure. Oh, no, the churros were brought in 1493 by Columbus. And that's the only wool that was here until in 1859, the churro were brought into the Rio Grande Valley, and it started what Joe Ben Wheat referred to as the contamination period, because the pure churros got contaminated by the merino. Now, the merino was supposed to be better wool, and it was the prize wool of Spain, but it took solvents to clean it. There's no solvents in the Southwest, and it was a shorter fiber, and so it basically kind of ruined the early churro wool. That starts in 1859, and over the next 10 or 15 years, sheep, just being sheep, started interbreeding, and so the wool became contaminated. It helps us date the pieces too.
Has it been restored or cleaned?
No, this blanket is totally original.
It's pristine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's pristine, has all its original selvaging and everything. It's a beautiful example, but it was, only in one family for all those years. And so this is the first phase. Okay. So anyway, in 1851, under the Stitgraves expedition, a couple of cavalry officers collected blankets, and one of them was the first phase, and the other was what we have come to call second phase. The Navajos didn't use those terms. But here is a classic second phase. And so what's happened is they've added 12 double bars of red. The red is all the bayetta, the raveled cloth. And you can see it's 2 different colors. Actually, this is a combination of the dark color and a lighter color put together. So we know this style started by 1851. Now, we don't know why they picked those 12 spots to do it. I would speculate in the Navajo way of thinking, they were kind of like chakras or energy points that they accented on the body, because look what happens. So you have lapels, you have cuffs, but every second phase looks just like this practically. Instead of the later ones, they kind of started varying it. But so this is what the people wore, and it was high fashion. So 1851, this style, it's kind of stayed with the Navajo for less than 10 years, and the introduction of red into these early blankets that started developing, and more red developed. Here is another second phase, but it's a much more developed version of it, because you see there's red lines connecting the double sets of red bars. So this is the next stage. This is probably about 1860 or so. And here, especially note all the different shades of red. So enough red was being gathered to make a whole blanket. And we're familiar with what I'm talking about with the bayetta. Navajos were red men in the red land. They were basically color starved, but they loved the shade of red. And the Spanish had it, and they saw it. And so when they would raid the Rio Grande Valley and the Spanish villages, they take every bit of red cloth they could, and they take it back to the women. The women would painstakingly take that red cloth apart. The Navajo term for that is bayetta. They didn't practice spectrophotometric analysis of it or any of these things that people now try to do to date things, but it was just red, and they wanted the red in their blanket.
That's still a second phase?
This is still be a second phase, exactly. So what you really see, if you just see the connecting lines, so it's developing from the first just red bars. So sometime in the late 1850s, the red bars grew together, and we call that a 12-spot pattern. The red bars grew together and merged in the center and started stepping out into the stripes. And so this is called a third phase, and this is probably the most well-recognized blanket of the Navajo. And you can see tremendous amount of red color in this. And I will add that this was the first classic Navajo blanket I ever bought in 1977 in Pittsburgh. I paid $1,500 for it. And you see where it still is. And through the increase of price of these and everything, never sort of motivated me to get rid of it. So, oh, no, they didn't ever have the dye. It was way too expensive, and they didn't know how to use it. So all they was able to get was red material dyed with cochineal. Is that pretty cool? So, you know, I always like to say that I think it was Ralph Lauren that taught him how to do this. And I tend to call this the Ralph Lauren period, of course. So, but so there are an expression of the Navajo. The Navajo or the Diné considered themselves, as all people do, the people at the center of the earth. And so they were very bold. Isn't that beautiful? So, some now, oh, I don't know. I'm afraid somebody say I'll take it. No, on the market it's $100,000, $125,000 right now. You could get a similar blanket. You can't get my old blanket, and so it's
Even if we twist your arm.
probably yes, you could. No. It hasn't been twisted hard enough yet, I'll say, since 1977, and I'm still proud to have it, and it's a treat. So, okay, there we go. So anyway, let's just hold it out once. What started, the next phase, so to speak, that started happening is the diamonds grew large enough and started coalescing, and the stripes that were which we saw was the primary part of the blanket, became merely a background to a lot of supplemental designs appearing in it, and the diamonds being very large, and that's what we call a fourth phase. And that's not really written in much literature. I was the first one that actually coined the term in print.
And those
So,
are steps?
what?
Those are steps?
Well, that is terrace designing, yes.
In which direction was it woven in?
Wider than long. So it's woven the way we're showing it or the way it's worn. And so that came from the Pueblo loom, weaving them wider than long. The serape, like the Mexican serapes and the Rio Grande serapes, the Navajos started emulating that, but you just got ahead of me. So, anyway, so for themselves, although the women made beautiful blankets for the men, for themselves, they made much more somber garments. This happens to be way too big of one, but this is a women's manta or one-piece dress. And so this is basically what they look like. You had the blue in the ends, the red raveled, and then the large brown center. So can you, it's going to be, so lift the one arm up. There you go. So this could be worn as a one-piece dress. This is a little big for my wife, as we can see, but they were worn as a one-piece dress. The Pueblos did the same thing as this, and then a second one was worn as a manta over the shoulders. So if you see early pictures from the 1860s, 1870s, this is usually what they're wearing. That's, you know, it's the weaver. Not much I could say. So anyway, these sort of emulate the Pueblo, but the Navajo soon shifted into start weaving 2 panels. And so we don't know why. It can be speculated that the earlier garments that the Navajos wore were deer skin, and so there would have been a deer skin piece in front, a deer skin piece in back. That's what most of the so-called authorities say. And so they came to 2 pieces. Now these 2 pieces have been connected down the center. But one of these would have been a front panel, one would have been a back panel. It would have been attached over the shoulders and actually rather loosely attached down the sides. And the early cavalry officers commented on how loosely attached they were on the sides. But so this one's just been put together to really be hung as a piece of art. But these are very, very fine. And if anybody really ever wants to collect Navajo, I'll catch you. Collect Navajo blankets, I always say you should buy one of these because they're incredibly fine, incredibly beautiful, not that expensive relative to a lot of the other Navajo blankets. And so it sort of sets the tone for what you want to do. There's a little bit of indigo green you see right here to accent the blue diamonds.
So these first 3 phases of Navajo weaving, the designs are pretty much from their culture and not influenced from some other culture?
It's all their concept of what design was. You know, who knows what spaceship landed and might have influenced it, but, you know, but yeah, it's generally thought, yes, it's pure Navajo design. We're good? Okay, so now, although the women wore the dresses, they also had shawls that they wore on top of the dresses. And so they went through the same changes as the men's blankets did, but the women's blankets were generally smaller in size and the stripes were narrow rather than the big bold stripes. Now, if you ask Ralph Lauren, he would say to make a person look more petite, you would use smaller designs. To make a person look bolder, you'd use bold designs. These guys figured it out long before Ralph Lauren was born. So this is a woman's second phase, chief's blanket. And so it's, rather than white, it's used kind of a comb. They've combed a little brown into the white, made it kind of a gray, but then the red is all bayetta. Now this will fit her. You got it?
Yeah, I think I do. Except for the Velcro.
You look so petite.
Yes. Did you make that one?
What's that?
Did you make that one?
Not that talented.
So that's a woman's second phase, and there are women's first phases. They're very rare, though. And then here is a beautiful bayetta. And the nice thing about this is they got 2 shades of bayetta and how carefully the weaver used it. By the diamonds are a lighter shade of bayetta. Here's the darker shade of bayetta. And this one has white stripes rather than the combed gray stripes of the other one. And so both of these blankets date to about 1865, 1875. Here, let's see it. And I might add, you're doing pretty good, yeah. So anyway, I might add that the second phase, I'll catch you in a second. The second phase blanket was collected by Mary Cabot Wheelwright and given to a niece of hers. And so that's where that blanket came from. Sir?
The second and third phase, is there consistency with the number of steps and the pyramids and triangles as there were with Hispanic?
No, it would just depend on the width of the blanket and the size of the steps. It was always sort of just a weaver decision. You see larger scale steps, you see smaller scale steps. You know, one little thing it might tell us is something a little bit about the fingerprint of the weaver that did it. And so if we see, you know, really similarities between 2 blankets, then they might be possibly the same weaver, but it's really speculative. We don't really know. Well, because the early collectors, you know, if you're out in the West and you got an old Navajo blanket and you took it, started riding back home to Ohio or somewhere, you know, you started thinking that, oh, you had to have got it from a chief or a princess. That had to be the only two models they came in. So it's really a total misnomer and a name for that particular style of blanket. It really has nothing to do with chiefs or anything like that. It just was probably romantic, you know, is all we can really say. So, and the Navajos had their own term for them, and don't ask me to pronounce it, and so the Navajos didn't call them chiefs blankets, the people that got them.
Because the Navajos didn't really have chiefs.
They never even had chiefs. Yeah, they had clan leaders, but no chiefs, and that's what made it very difficult to deal with the Navajo, because there was no one person that spoke for the Navajo. There was just clan leaders, and so each clan, so they always had a lot of trouble dealing with the Navajo because no Navajo spoke for them. So they were trying to make treaties with the Navajo, and they couldn't do it because what one clan leader said, another clan leader might not agree with, and so it was very problematic. We're good? We done? No, I got it. Sure, thank you.
Did they ever duplicate, like they came up with a pattern and design on a rug and then they would do that several times, or each one very?
No, the weavers are very independent, and so they're all going to do different things. As we see we definitely see things we think are made by the same maker. It's speculative, you know, but sometimes they have what I call the fingerprint of the weaver, because they're so similar to one another that it's probably not a coincidence. So sometimes you get a little extra coloration or a little extra design and little things that kind of tell you that's it. And then we can take to go studying the selvage and the lazy line structure. And so several of those things all tell us a little more about the fingerprint of the weaver, but it's still pretty speculative. But as we get to the 20th century things, the weaver's fingerprint becomes much more obvious amongst the things that they made. We're good? Okay. Well, as the Navajos were obviously in constant contact with the Spanish, and the Spanish were weaving these long red serapes like we see in the exhibition there, the Navajos emulated them. And so they started their own serapes, and they were the earliest stuff in them is Josiah Gregg, or one of those 1830s, 1840s, and they were called Serape Navajo. And so here is a Serape Navajo. And the big problem, sorry, kind of one of the problems was gaining enough red material to make a whole blanket. Now this is about 1865 when this blanket's made, and you can see all of the various shades of the red bayeta that was gathered to make the whole blanket. So very typical coloration for these. The majority of them are just red, white, and blue. Same as our flag. It's kind of an odd coincidence, but so anyway, these were worn, you know, horizontally or vertically rather than, I guess it would be horizontally. But see, here's the idea of it is, I'm trying to get out so people can actually see it and see how it looked. Do I have it? Am I have a blanket on right? So this is what we call pure classic Navajo design, with just the step terracings and the bands. And so they're beautifully finely woven. They would basically repel water. And the nicest thing about wool, though, it's equally as thermal wet as it is dry. So even if it did get wet, it's not going to make it cold. It's just going to make it wet. So this is probably the most typical type of these, is the red classic serape. So let me show you a couple others here. So here is another type of them, and this is a Whitefield serape. And so the design is totally just determined by the, weaver. But this one has beautiful design. And again, you can see it's a little further from a distance. You don't see as much of the red variation in the materials in it, but it definitely has quite a bit of variation in the material. And so let's just see how this one looks on.
So the pink was carded with white.
It can be, but in this particular piece, it's just a lighter shade of red. But you can, which they did do a lot, was card the red with a white and got a pink and used it. But the deeper red was the most popular color. So, I didn't tell that story already. You know, I started to, but I realized I jumped the topic. But after we took over the Southwest under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and actually earlier, yes, 1848. And so in 1849, we sent the first surveying expedition out to find out what we'd actually uncovered, because really basically everything west of the Rio Grande was unknown. It was all native territory, and they really didn't know what they had. And so in August 1st of 1849, a surveying expedition left out of Santa Fe under a Colonel Simpson and Washington, and they headed to the Jemez Mountains. They went around the Jemez Mountains. They went out, they went to Chaco, and the cartographer drew all of the giant houses in Chaco in the first couple weeks of August of 1849, and they all have the same names, the big houses, as they do today. So I don't know if those names were there first or whether he actually named them, but all the names are included in those documents. Well, they continued west. They got across to the Bisti Badlands and continued. They knew that the Chuscas were kind of the Navajo sort of headquarters, and they got to the edge of the Chuscas. About 3 miles out in front of our trading post, they had the first so-called peace meeting between the Navajos and the U.S. troops. And, I think 3,000 Navajos showed up. And so the troops were scared. There was a couple hundred of them, and they were kind of freaked out by it, and they set some cannons up on the hill and, tried to protect themselves. They didn't know. They'd heard a lot of things about them, but basically, it's all recorded. We can read all of this. If you have any interest in what the U.S. government said, what the Navajo said, it's all recorded. And basically, the U.S. government's position is that they are now part of a new country, and we will protect you. And that's what we're there to do. So the Navajo response was, really, give us all our women and children back that have been stolen by the Spanish and the other Indian tribes. And they said, well, we really can't do that. Well, it happens that one of the scouts, one of the Hispanic scouts that was leading the expedition, noticed one of the Navajos had a horse that he claimed was his. And he wanted his horse back. And so the Colonel Washington says to the head Navajo, he was 83 years old, named Narbona. And so Narbona called the man up and said, where did you get the horse? And he said, well, I bought him from a Mexican guy. And Narbona said, well, how much did you pay for him? And so he told him. So he tells Colonel Washington, if the guy wants to buy his horse back, he can. But he bought the horse fair and square, and it's his horse. It got tenser and tenser and tenser. The U.S. troops, right after promising peace, opened fire and killed 11 Navajos, including the 83-year-old chief. And basically, that ended the relationship between the United States government and the Navajo. And when they got back to Santa Fe, they were told that that guy was a peace leader. And one time in the 1830s, a bunch of what are called enemy Navajos that from out were Tohajale over on west of Albuquerque. They were called the enemy Navajo because they kind of led Spanish troops against the Navajo, and so they weren't liked by the Navajo. But they had gone and done on a raiding expedition and then stolen a bunch of horses. And Narbona and one other man took the horses. He found the Navajos that did it. He punished them. He took the horses, and this is like 1836 or 1837. He rode him and himself back into Santa Fe and gave the horses to the governor of New Mexico. And so that's what the Spanish said. That's who they killed, the guy that would try to do anything to keep peace. And so it didn't go well after that. And so what ensued was about 20 years of, hard feelings between them. So this is so warm. Here you go. So this is a very particular type of blanket, and they were popular amongst the Pueblo Indians especially. And so a term, kind of a derogatory term for the Pueblo was moki. We see that term used a lot. And so this blanket earned that handle. So a moki blanket is determined by the use of the dark brown and blue indigo stripes, which is actually a little more of a Hispanic trait. But this is what we call a moki serape. The red is all the bayeta. There's little accents of green in it. And so this dates to about 1870, 1875. And I'm going to try it on. I think it's really fun to actually see how they really looked. So. And so this is a pretty popular style of Navajo serape. And we see, quite a few of them. And some of them are just plain banded brown, blue, and white, but often they're a little more serapes by putting all the serape designs in them. And basically, you see these are really just saltillo diamonds, so this has a lot of Hispanic influence.
How many of them have an opening for the head?
Darn you jumped ahead of me. There's a couple dozen that were emulating Mexican serapes and being worn. They generally didn't do it, but they did it in a couple cases. And so here, you take this, and this is a Navajo poncho. This is by far the best blanket I've ever bought in my 55 years of doing this. So this dates to about 1855. It's amazing how finely woven this is and how beautiful the design is. The next lot isn't completely opened up. But let me go back to point out something that did I lose my basket somewhere? Okay. Remember when I talked about pure classic design, Navajo design being pure classic, and I showed you the basket? And the only two designs are bands, terraced half diamonds. Okay? Keep that in mind. Let's look at this blanket. It only consists of those two designs. So this is what we call a pure classic Navajo blanket. It had terraced half diamonds put together, terraced half diamonds floating, and thin bands.
But that was woven in one piece.
Yeah, this is woven in one piece. So it's what's called a tapestry slit in the center. So it's woven in and it's selvaged just like the edges of it are. It's very, very fine. Let's walk it all the way down there so people can get a little closer look at it. No, you go first and so we hold it out.
All right.
It's extremely fine. So this is my prize for 55 years.
So how much is that worth?
About $1 million. But it's more rare than it is valuable.
Drag it on the floor.
I'm not the first one.
How long would it take to weave something like this?
A good year, if not more, depending on if she took that Evelyn Wood speed weaving course or not.
About a year. Wow.
Not amazing?
So these are bigger than the first phase blankets.
Yeah, this one is. They aren't all. This one happens to be an extremely large example.
But it was meant to be worn still.
Oh, yeah. And it's not so big. It's more the size of a saltillo, but it's not that big. Those are 8 feet. I think this is only 7+ feet. And, if you actually take it and put it like it would be worn, it's not really that long, see? So it just barely goes to my knees. So, but this is my treasure. Yeah, right. Cash. So before I proceed, any questions? We're doing okay. Go ahead.
I'd like to know how you store these blankets to keep them.
I'll tell you how, but I won't tell you where. No. You know, we generally will roll them, and I'll roll a few of them together, and we have racks that the rolls will come on, like we took this one off the roll maybe before a lot of people arrived. But that's the best method, but it's a pain in the butt to look at them and stuff, and so I'll fold them. I have shelves, and I'll fold them and put them, just not stack them too high so the pressure of one another doesn't hurt. But you know, I spend a lot of time with my blankets, and so I like easier access. The rolling is a little more of a pain. But if I know I'm putting stuff away for a while, we'll roll it up and it'll keep it from being creased. So, and you know, the best thing, the best way you can store them is where you see them. Use them, put them on your wall, put them on your floor. You know, people like put them in their closet in their bedroom and think they're helping it, but that's where the bugs go. So they've learned that too. So as long as you're looking at them, you know that they're, you know, safe. But so many, I went to these old couple that had all these greenhouses in Denver once, and they had all these Navajo blankets, and oh, they're really safe. We've kept them in these trunks, and they opened the trunks, and their powder was always left in the trunks. The moths had completely destroyed them. And there, you know, and the moths are slow. They'll start chewing on stuff and show you that they're causing damage, but if you don't, as they multiply and multiply, they're just, you know, a frightening thing. Now, we have signs that say no moths allowed. Now, it works for the literate ones, but the illiterate ones are the problem. And we tend to blame the parents for it. But no, you know, you become a curator, and you're kind of have to take care of them, and it's good if you're going to hang them that you let the light change it. You don't put them in too bright of rooms. Don't put them in direct sunlight. You know, there is some care to owning that's involved in carrying these things, because that blanket is 175 years old, and you kind of want to keep it in nice condition. I strongly recommend it. Sir?
Down at SARS, their collection has blankets that you can't really handle because of some kind of poison that they wrap the blankets in.
Arsenic.
Arsenic.
Yeah, I'm on the board. I've been hired, I was taken on the board as a special textile advisory because I understand exactly what the problem is and stuff, and so we're addressing that problem now.
When did that start?
Well, it's basically it's carbon tetrachloride that was done to it, and there was a method that a lot of dry cleaners and stuff used called cyberized, and basically that's just putting arsenic in them. And so it was a bug proofing thing, but nobody really asked. And so, you know, when they asked me to be on the board, I said, so the curator said, well, you know, we got all these problems and everything. And so my first question for her was, have you ever done any research on the long-term effects for keeping the arsenic in the blankets? And she says, what? I said, what if you open the cabinets and there's powder in there someday? That's the biggest question you should be asking. And the chair of the board was in the room, and he looked at me, he goes, you want to be on our board? The curator didn't like it quite as much because I was challenging her ability to take really good care of them. And so we're working on, you can clean that out. The water that comes off that cleaning is hazmat, and so it needs to be dealt with especially. And basically, for cleaning most blankets, you can get a blanket cleaned for $300 or so. It basically doubles, because of the special hazmat, it doubles the cost. It costs $600. And so, you want to put in a question there?
Do you know any institutions that have enough wall space and floor space to keep the blankets in optimal conditions?
Well, your question's sort of twofold, because mainly I think, keeping them rolled up is fine. So you don't really need floor space or anything to keep them. You just need to, basically all their blankets are rolled. If you've ever been in there and looked at all the things were rolled and everything. So yeah, that's my job. One of my jobs right now is to address these issues. And I suggested to them that they start a program of Adopt a Blanket, where you get a picture of the Chief White Antelope blanket and you can put it on your wall, and so it costs you $500 or $600, and you can brag that you cleaned that blanket. And I'll tell you, that's when the guy said, "You really want to be on our board?" And so they like the idea, and we had a meeting Wednesday with them, addressing these issues, because they're on like a $20 million restoration process right now, and they're going to build new facilities for storing their blankets, but they're also going to build a facility for viewing the blankets, and they're real interested in me looking at the blankets and picking out ideas for traveling exhibitions, to kind of putting certain stuff together that makes cohesive shows, and so they can be toured. So that's all in their future plans. Yeah, so. What's that? School of American Research. Oh, it's actually, they changed, it was always the School of American Research. Now it's the School of Advanced Research, because, everything changes. I liked School of American Research, but they.
In Santa Fe, right?
It's in Santa Fe. Yeah, and it's on the corner of Old Santa Fe Trail. They have a great big, they have like 25 acres right there in downtown Santa Fe. And it was the White sisters, who were early day collectors, who all that property used to belong to. And they started a Indian Arts Fund, and a lot of wealthy people in Santa Fe contributed to it. And so all those pots and all those baskets that they have were collected like in the 20s, 30s, 40s by a lot of rich people, that it was really good they did, because they saved a lot of really fantastic things. And then that collection got kind of split between what's now MIAC, which used to be a laboratory of anthropology. It's now called Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And half of those blankets are in there, and the other half went to SAR. So.
What about older saddle blankets that were used on horses? Do you see sweat on them, or soft?
Oh yeah, how could you not, really? Yeah. If you ever ran that horse, your blanket got sweaty. But they're just wool. And it's one of the most practical, fibers in the world. And you can clean them. They clean fairly well. They can be seriously stained where it can't be cleaned, but there's the most competent cleaner we've ever had in my 55 years is a guy in Denver now, and he's just very conscientious, and he's super good. And so I'm trying to recommend that's who they use. There's bigger outfits that have fancier equipment, but this guy is just super sensitive and really likes it, and they kind of like that. He's a great guy. And so, and for my plug, his name is Enver in Denver. Just write that down. Tell him I sent you. And so nobody's he's the best cleaner we've ever had. And he's very, very sensitive. So, good. How are we doing for time? Oh, half hour? Oh man, I can take a nap. So this we showed yesterday with the slave blankets, because this is a Bosque Redondo serape. I showed you the white serape and the red serape and the mochi serape and the poncho serape. So I'm just re-showing you this because this is what we call Bosque Redondo. These are all early. Here, let's go this way here. These is all early, basically early Germantown yarns, the very first Germantown yarns. And this was made for a military officer who was stationed at Bosque Redondo. It became part of the Crane collection, was all donated to the what was the Denver Museum of Natural History. I think maybe they've changed their name now, but I got this. I traded a Navajo first phase, which was the blanket they always wanted. So I came up with one, and they traded me a bunch of blankets for it. And so I've had this 25 years or so. And it has really good military history, collection history, so I was happy to get it. What's that, somebody say? Provenance, that's great provenance, yeah. And so underneath that tag still has the museum. Of course, you know, one of the things in the deal, they said I wasn't allowed to tell people where it came from. I said, yeah, fat chance of that, guys. Sure, that's fine. So anyway, and so I'm kind of proud that it came from there, but they didn't want to know they were actually trading things, but they wanted the first phase far worse. And you know where the first phase came from, which is an amazing story. I was doing benefit appraisals for the museum. And so people would come in and they'd pay $20 or $25 and I'd appraise things. I do this at museums all over the country. And I was in a room doing this, and there was a guard in the other end of the room. And somebody brought me in a plain striped Moki blanket. And so it was just brown, blue, and white. And when that blanket came out of the bag of the lady's thing, the guard moved from the other side of the room with the door and came all over right by me. And so I noticed it. So I said to him, are you kind of like this blanket or interested in this for some reason? He goes, no, I have one at home. I go, oh, really? He goes, yeah, I have one at home. And I said, well, you know, you work at the museum. I'll appraise it for you tomorrow for free if you want to bring it in. He go, would you? And I go, oh, yeah, sure, bring it in. You don't have, you know, the $20. He was happy he didn't have to pay the $20 for the institution he worked for. Well, he brings in his so-called Moki blanket in a bag, and I pull it out, and it's first phase Chief's blanket. It was brown, blue, and white, but the stripes ran the wrong way, and I almost died. And so the curator, who's sitting across the room, sees that first phase come out of the bag. She trips on her way running over to where it is. She immediately gets on the phone, calls her director, calls members of the board, and the next thing I know, I got like 17 people surrounding me looking at this blanket. And so at that time, I think it was worth about $75,000 because this was a long time ago, and I told him that. And they immediately started in on him. Well, you know, we've been looking for this kind of blanket forever, and we'd really like you to give it to us, and, you know, blue doll, this and that. He goes, oh, excuse me, that kid just says it's worth $75,000. That's more money than I make in a year. I have no interest in giving it to you. And they kept going, no, you gotta. And so everything, and so it worked out that I paid him the $75,000 and agreed to trade it to the museum for stuff they had. And they had a certain amount of time to do it, which they didn't. The curator couldn't stand to trade something out of her collection, even though she was getting a much better blanket. And it went on and on. It's a long, long story how it ended up. And so it finally ended up, but it was a pain in the butt. So anyway, the Navajos get herded up in 1864, and they're sent to their concentration camp, which was called Bosque Redondo, which they stayed for 4 years until 1868. Not my favorite part of the Navajo story, and so I don't really dwell on it. They did weave blankets while they were there for military officers and somewhat for their own use, but there was a big shortage of material. They didn't have the sheep. The government had destroyed most of the sheep. So anyway, when the Navajos were, you know, it's really nice, we gave them back their own homeland, which is a pretty nice deal.
After we didn't find any gold.
That is exactly right. A lot of people don't know that. The real reason they took them and herded them all up wasn't because of the raiding or anything. It's because there was a military officer who kept insisting it was mostly, several guys, but one, they just insisted it was richer than California. And obviously California was pretty rich, and so they were. And so that's why they really herded them. And after 4 years, they realized there really wasn't any gold, so we might as well let them have their land back. But they also destroyed the sheep. And so what you had was, you know, 10,000 or so Navajos, half of which were probably women, half of which were very skilled weavers. And so there were weavers that had no weaving material. So about that same time, a mill to spun wools had started a few years before then, but a mill opened up in Philadelphia in a place called Germantown, Pennsylvania. and it's basically in the city limits of Philadelphia. But so this mill opened up, and so the government started buying thousands of pounds of commercial yarns and started distributing to the Navajo. And according to Joe Ben Wheat's studies, that probably within the next 10 to 15 years, about 80,000 pounds of yarn were given to the Navajos. Now that's according, Joe was always quick to point out, that's according to government records, which are probably the most inaccurate source of anything that you'd ever want to find. But those yarns came in a wide variety of colors. The Navajos, who had basically always been color starved, went crazy. So they started creating what we call Germantown eye dazzlers. And so here is one of the greatest examples of a Germantown eye dazzler. And so I think there's 15 or 16 colors in this blanket. But they literally went crazy with, you know, doing all this. Now, they're likened, you know, that these are super, super popular with contemporary artists, Jasper Johns, Kenneth Nolan, Tony Berlant, Andy Warhol, all collected these because it reminded them of their own associations with color. The only difference was those guys could start a painting and get halfway up it and just go, I don't like it, let's paint over it. The Navajo, time she got this far into it, she was months and months into the blanket. So there was no such thing as turning around. And so it's just amazing how beautiful, balanced, and color-wise and design-wise it is. So this dates to about 1875, 1880. Ma'am?
I was just wondering what the Germantown wool was, what kind of wool it was.
Well, it was sheep wool, first off, but it was a manufacturing. So they bought their wool from all over the world. They bought it from New Zealand one year. They bought it from the Navajo one year. In wool is a commodity, so you know they price shopped and bought their wools from basically everywhere. So we see the Germantown yarns in a lot of different qualities, and so. So we don't really know how to date it because of that, because nobody really ever kept track of those kind of things. It would have been a way had somebody kept track of yarns from each year. We could have said what year. But this was made probably about 1875.
Is the 3 yarn versus the 4 yarn in
Ply, you're mentioning ply. Well, that has to do with the manufacturing equipment of yarn. So the hand-spun yarns at that time were mostly 3-ply. And so the first manufacturing equipment of yarn in the Industrial Revolution was basically to copy what was being done by hand more efficiently. So that's why they started with 3-ply yarns and developed equipment that could do that. They soon realized that the 1, 2, 3 yarns being made into one was somewhat clumsy, and if they had 4 could go to 2 to 1, and so shortly, probably within 10 years, most of 3-ply equipment became 4-ply equipment. So that was the reason for that. And it is a little bit we can use, it is a little bit we can use to date yarn. So 3-ply is slightly earlier than the 4-ply, but considering shelf life and all kinds of things, that's not a lot of the guys think they really can date something by that, but it's not really as accurate as you might want to think.
I'm curious about the fringe on this.
It's just added. It's just added, just to fancy it up more. Go ahead. I'll catch you in a second here.
Did they start using the synthetic dyes at the same time, or was that
Basically, synthetic dyes were discovered in 1856 for silk and 1857 for wool, and it became a worldwide billion-dollar business, literally. And so those dyes got everywhere. And so Joe Ben Wheat found those synthetic dyes on what were called guillas. So when the trains came up from Mexico, or the wagon trains that came up from Mexico, all that stuff was recorded. And so several places you had to stop, and the Mexican authorities would completely unload your wagon and make sure that you weren't smuggling things. And so those are called trade guillas. And a lot of the ones that came from Mexico City to Santa Fe are in the archives in Santa Fe. And so he went through those and he found dimension of those synthetic dyes by 1860, which was just a few short years after they were discovered. But basically, any place in the world that wove got synthetic dyes and got commercial yarns.
That was my question.
Was it? So,
But not all of them are plied yarns.
oh no, just
Yeah.
Germantown's are
Just
plied
the
yarn, yeah. Because and so, we also bought them, thousands of sheep out of the Rio Grande Valley, but and by 1859, the merino had been introduced, so the wool, Joe's term always for is the wool that the Navajos given after Bosque Redondo was contaminated. And the churro wool ceased to exist as it once was. And so that was you could kind of see that thing in the yarns. And again, when we see merino contamination in the wool, has to be post 1859. So a 1830s blanket doesn't have merino wool in it. So it's kind of like Chevys, I tell people. They had fins in 57 and they didn't in 58. So we can't exactly do things in 1 year periods, but we usually do plus or minus 5 or something like that. You got a question here?
The government was furnishing the Navajo with the wool?
Provided. Oh yeah, initially. And it was an attempt because we were, obviously we were in the middle of, in the 1860s, we were kind of busy. I forget what we were doing. But, and so it was an attempt to kind of apologize for how badly they'd really treated the Navajo, yeah.
Yeah, in New England, there was a tremendous amount of wool industry, and during the Civil War, that's where most of the wool was coming from for uniforms and whatever. But going back just a little bit further with your basis, well, what was the main source for red? Because there was so much of it seems to be in your rug.
Well, that's because the Navajos love red. But basically, we'll talk about Europe, okay? So madder was the dye red, and it was a pretty dull red, really. But red was the color of royalty, and so they used madder, and that's a vegetal dye. When the Moors conquered Spain, 600, 700, 800 AD, I don't remember the exact year that it happened, that the Moors conquered Spain, and they brought a little scale insect dye called lac. And it became the rage of Europe. And so lac is a scale insect that is basically a relative of the cochineal beetle. When they discovered the New World had cochineal, and cochineal became the second largest export out of the New World historically. Second only to precious metals, almost as valuable pound for pound as silver was. And the Mexicans never wanted the Spanish to know it was just bug blood. It's carminic acid, basically. And so they never knew exactly what the source was, but it was red. And we were talking to some people mentioned yesterday how they know there's cochineal right here now. And I had a ranch in Arbalise in southwest Colorado, and we had cochineal on that when I had that. And so, but it wasn't here then. It was further down south. And so that's a climate change thing that brought the cochineal this far north.
I have a question I almost asked yesterday but didn't, about the Hudson Bay blankets that were red and black. Was there ever any trade of those blankets into this part of the market?
Well, they went mainly to like Canadian sources, and the French fur trapper and traders made it into the Southwest and traded. There's journals you can see where they did that. And so they brought those things in, and I'm sure some of them ended up being traded to the Navajo. And it's a little bit, in a later sense, by the 1880s or so, the Navajos actually made copies of Hudson Bay blankets. There's quite a few of those that are just exact copies, the white with the bands on it and everything. And then they had a point system, they called it, where they had kind of bars that came in from the edge that were measured the weight and value of the blanket. The Navajos included those in their blankets too.
First seen at the Taos Trade Fair.
Very possibly.
Yeah, I wondered whether they had ever raveled the material of the Hudson Bay, the red.
Well, mostly those are, That's a technically difficult question, because mostly in the later days they are what are called woolen, as opposed to what is worsted. And so the woolen is, the furthest extent of woolen is felt. And so the Hudson Bay blankets, as you see that thick combining, didn't ravel very well. And so that wasn't really much of a source. And they were white, and the Navajos wanted red.
I'm talking about the red ones with the black stripe.
I'm not familiar with those. I'm sure they existed.
Yeah, they did.
I'm just not, yeah, my wife would know. She's smart. And so, anyway. So here is a Germantown Moki. How we doing, 10 minutes or something?
15.
Okay, thank you.
I've got all night.
Well, wait, at the end, I'm gonna steal 5 more of your minutes, and I'll bet you'll stay for it. So this is a Germantown Moki, so this is about 1880 or so. And so the indigo has been replaced with purple aniline and black and red. And so this is, here, honey, here, turn around. So this is period where the Germantown is used. We call the transitional period. The first period of Navajo blanket is referred to the classic period. In the classic period, they made blankets for their own use, for their own wearing, and they were widely, they were valuable and considered very valuable trade item, as I explained last night, that they were, by the Spanish, considered the most valuable trade item in the Southwest. That led to the slaving, so the rest is history. But when the Navajos returned, they didn't have many sheep, and so they started, building their sheep herds again. And then Anglo traders started moving into the reservation. Lorenzo Hubble was one of the first, and he was there in the 70s, 80s, and then 90s. And so other traders started moving into other places. Tisnos Pass, all these places. One of them is Totolina's, our store we've run for 30 years now on the Navajo Reservation. So each trader in his region, right, decided what he could get the local weavers to do and what he thought he could sell. So about 16 regional styles developed around 1900. Now Lorenzo Hubble said to his weavers, you can make it any color you want as long as it's red. And so there's different traders in different areas. These styles developed.
Were the traders trading with different clans?
Well, they would trade with all the clans that existed in their area.
So it wasn't, they weren't divided up by clan?
No, mostly the trade in Navajo was usually within about a 10 to 15 mile radius of the post is who traded there. And so in that, like in our area, we have about 20 clans that exist.
How many are there in total?
Well, there was maybe 80 first time, but a lot of them are now extinct because the elders of the clan died and they would redo it again. And so, it's a question that a lot of people have different answers to, but around probably 80 clans. And so that's a really important thing to the Navajo. 2 Navajos walk up and meet, and the first thing they say is you have their mother clan, that's the primary clan that a Navajo is, and then the father's clan is a secondary clan, and then the grandfather's clan on the mother's side and the grandfather's clan on the mother's side and on the father's side. So if 2 Navajos meet, they will recite their clans to one another, and generally they either have a clan that is similar so they know how they're related, or they'll have clans that are related to each other. So it's very complicated. I spent 25 years studying it. I know it very well. I know mostly every one of my weavers. I know their clans and everything. I always shock them by that, And I make up my names, like Tabaha is Water Edge clan, and so I called it the Beach Boy clan. So, they love it when you goof on them, and especially use their language to kind of goof on them. They think it's really funny. And so, anyway, so There was a trader named J.B. Moore, and it was actually Lorenzo Hubble that produced the first catalog, and it was in the 1890s to market Navajo rugs. And then there was a trader about 15 miles from our post named J.B. Moore. And J.B. Moore published a catalog first in about 1903. It's undated, so it's speculated. But in 1911, yeah, this is heavy. In 1911, you can keep it down for a second. In 1911, he published his most famous catalog, and there was 16 color plates, and you could order a rug in a design. You could pick the color if you wanted it. You could pick the size, and then he had 3 or 4 different values, you know, that you could buy the cheaper one, you could buy the most expensive one. Now this is an early J.B. Moore, what we call a storm pattern. Can you lift it up? Yeah. See? And so the idea is this is the so-called center of the storm, has 4 lightning bolts that go out to the 4 sacred mountains. So Moore considered, let's let it down for a second, Moore considered it a little bit of Navajo mythology, a little bit of trader ingenuity. And so this is what's called roving, and Moore was the first one that used it. So that means it was sent off the reservation as fleeces and was cleaned and carded, and it came back on these rolls. It's kind of thick, about this big around, and the Navajo still has to split it off and hand spin it. So this is still hand spun, but look at the color. See how even the color is? That's a sign of roving. And so he was the first one that used it. He says in 1912 he stopped doing it. But we don't know if he was in that. That was in a report to the government, so we don't know how much we want to count on that. But this is an early J.B. Moore storm pattern. Not a catalog pattern, though. And so what he did was he picked rugs that he really liked. He put them in his catalog. The rest is kind of history. So anyway, one of the posts that opened up was ours. Two Gray Hills post, which was sort of became the name of the rugs, was slightly before ours. It was opened in 1897. Our post opened in 1909. And so some good, you know, East Coast ladies decided one time that they should do some East, you know, Midwest kind of fairs. And so the first one was in 1911 at Shiprock. And the idea is all the Navajo artists and stuff would bring their art in there, kind of sponsored by the traders, and it was juried events, and so they gave ribbons out and all that kind of stuff. Now, Gallup Ceremonials, basically that was where Gallup Ceremonials started. They moved it to Gallup in 2 years. And then in 1921, Indian Market came along and was sort of a copy of it. Indian Market had a much better pretense because they were dealing more with the weavers. In the Gallup Fair, the ribbons went to the trader who worked the best with the weaver, so the trader actually got the ribbons, not the natives. And so when Indian Market started, they realized the fallacy of that. Gallup still runs by the same way, and Gallup was much bigger than Indian Market, but Indian Market, because of the way it's run, surpassed it. Now, I have photographs of the 1912 Shiprock Fair, and this rug is in the Two Gray Hills booth in that picture. So this is the earliest documented Two Gray Hills rug. So it makes it kind of cool, huh? And I also have one, but I couldn't find it this morning, unfortunately, that's in the Totalina booth at the same year. So I have the earliest documented Two Gray and the earliest documented Totalina rug.
And then Totalina was 3 years old?
Yeah, well, it was a few years later, yeah. About 3 years old, yeah. And so basically the traders competed for the same weavers. They're all the same weavers.
Shouts out his question. I just can't stand it.
What's that?
Mark White just shouts out questions.
I'm not dealing with it. So anyway, so this is an area called Clagato. It's near Ganado, and so In these, you usually see really classic early designs, you know, but rather than being the background being red, it just has red accents. So this is all hand spun wool. These were really, this is probably 20s or so. Just a really great Navajo rug. Put it on your floor, it lasts forever. So literally. So these are some of the regional styles that developed. And so here is what's up near Four Corners. There's a place called Tisnos Pas. It means circle of cottonwoods. And right near it is a post called Red Mesa. And the trader at Red Mesa really liked the old eye dazzlers, and so he kind of encouraged that thought to keep. So this is a classic Red Mesa outline, about 1930s, 1940s. Cool, huh? What? This is Red Mesa, which is just, I mean, the posts are only a few miles apart, so it's kind of hard to really distinguish it. Some people call them Tees outlines rather than Red Mesa, but this is really more a distinctive Red Mesa. Oh God, I don't know all the trader names and many, but later, I don't, you know, if you ask me who started the post, I wouldn't know. But later, a lady named, it was Roscoe and Ruth McGee at Red Mesa, and Ruthie McGee was a Bloomfield. She grew up at Totalina. So now here's a real fun Red Mesa. And this was made for a guy that was working on the reservation that had an Airstream trailer. So this went down the hall of the trailer. And so I bought this thing years and years ago. I think it's just really, I just like that. Throwing it out. But I think it's about 12 or so feet long, and it's about 18 inches wide.
It's 19 by 135 inches.
So it's
to be exact.
yeah, 19, so I was close. So anyway, so around, let's see what else. So anyway, here's a Tisnos Pas. This is the classic Tisnos Pas.
The gentleman that has a question.
Oh, sorry.
How was that runner oriented on the looms?
Vertically.
Vertically?
Oh, yeah.
Somebody had to have a ladder.
Well, they have sneaky ways of,
Explain the backdrop.
yeah, of doing a backdrop. And if you can kind of imagine that if it's with a much bigger rug, and once they got up a certain distance there, they loosened that bottom bar and they wrapped it around the bottom bar, right? And lowered the top so they could get to it. In essence, kind of a conveyor belt attitude. And so I have one of the loom stands like that is a backdrop that we had at the trading post, so we showed people how they made 9x12 rugs. And so I had a couple weavers make me a couple of those that shows what they call and so when it's in that position, that's what the weavers call it, a backdrop position.
But they would set it up initially at that height?
Well, not necessarily. They had to string it up.
Right.
Okay, so when they strung it up, it was probably laying flat across the hogan or something, and they'd string it, but they maybe never got strung up and tensioned that way. It got already put into a backdrop position. So, you know, when you got to spend 30 years. I was an expert when I went out to Totalina, but boy, have I learned a lot in 30 years. Buying 8,000 rugs from weavers, you kind of have a tendency to learn something. So these are the most orientalized looking of the Navajo rugs. This is from Tisnos Pas, up near Four Corners. And they tended to be very, very fancy, a lot of colors. And they were a very popular style. Unfortunately, it's kind of gone. The post is actually still open, but you know, the trader doesn't really work with weavers or anything, whatever they bring in, and basically they bring in a lot of sort of dumb color rugs to me. So, nothing beautiful like this.
Did the Depression and World War II, like, shortages cause any short-term changes?
Oh yeah, although whatever happens, they're Americans too, so whatever happens definitely affects, you know, it affects their market, you know, even selling them. So they go through ebbs and tides and everything, And, you know, and the different traders took over. I'll get you in 1 second, hon. And so the different traders took over and they had their own influence. And so it was a constantly changing thing. And that's kind of like the fins on Chevys. Those knowing and understanding those things that happened are what helps us date the pieces. So, is that good enough answer for you? Okay.
When did pound rugs come up?
Well, that was a turn of the century issue, you know, really, because rugs were bought and sold by the pound. And so the Navajos did everything they could to make it heavier. They would pound sand into them. Many a trader bought and they didn't even look at the designs. They weighed the rug. And so a few traders, a lot of traders reported to, you know, once they got it off the scale and the weaver got paid, they opened up, there's a big rock inside the rug. So, you know, these guys aren't dumb. So anyway, here's another Clagato area piece. This is a much nicer one, a really pretty one. What? Is it? Okay, so I'll go a couple more minutes. Pretty, huh? That's just a beautiful rug. That would go really nice in any living room. Okay, so anyway, there started a tradition in the central part of the reservation, Chinle, Crystal, and all those areas, to start. So the idea was, as a group of ladies got together that thought all the Navajos used vegetal dyes, and so they started having them, you know, dig up plants and roots and everything and dye. Had nothing to do with what Navajos had ever done, but this is what we call a wide ruins. And these are all vegetal dyes. And they banded like the early blankets were. So it was really a revival of something that never actually happened. They weren't historically accurate. But it does have, you can see all the different subtle colors, and it's really quite beautiful. So, you know, I've just ran myself out of time to talk about my own weaving tradition. Here's one more. This is made by a really dear lady named Ella Rose Perry. It's a weaver we happen to know that does these. I don't think she's with us anymore, but we bought a few rugs from her. She came over the mountain to see us. She was only about a half hour from us, and I was involved in taking her to the Utah Museum of Natural History in 1980 to do weaving demonstrations for us. So anyway, this was an area out in the Bisty Badlands. The trading post was called Bisty, and they used interesting circles in the design. So anyway, so they're really famous for the circular designs that they had. And some of them are amazing with how cool the circles are and stuff they used in them. But well, that's about 1935, say. Most of what we're looking at is sort of mid-20th century. I'm sorry, that was a good question. Something I should have explained. So anyway, so with the traders in our region, both at Totoline and Two Gray Hills, you know, found that the weavers didn't really like red, and so they started making, they would bring in rugs with just natural colors. And so the first, when they really got going with the Shiprock Fair, which was in 1913, you know, a Two Gray Hills won first prize. And the traders decided, wow, you know, that's it. You know, we can actually sell these rugs and make it nice. And so they started developing. Here's the, I meant to bring a real early one to show you what they were, but this is the earliest one I brought. And this is probably from about 1940. So this is a classic Two Gray Hills rug. And so these are all natural shades of wool. And you can see the gold and tan here. Let's flip it. It has actually faded a little, just like it does on the sheep's back. So it's a little darker on this side. And so they really started doing very precision designs, pattern borders, and single diamond, double diamond. This rug was made by a weaver named Yazzie Blackhorse. And Yazzie Blackhorse is the grandmother of our two employees at Totoline. So when I had already seen pictures of a rug, I knew it. When I saw this rug, I bought it. And I brought it in, and they ran and got their mother, and they took pictures of her mother with it and everything. And of course, it was folded up when I pulled it out to show to Violet, their mother. She started crying the minute she saw it, because she knew that was her mother's rug. So it's a fingerprint of their design. So
I was just wondering if they're still wearing the blankets.
no, these are rugs.
Okay.
So the blankets went out with the Pendleton and all that, you know, because the commercial blankets were real cheap and they didn't have to make them. So the traders shifted to them making rugs. I guess I didn't explain that, which I probably should have. So as long as you all caught that idea, that these are really rugs. Now,
You stop throwing them over your shoulder.
yeah, you stop, yes. And so this is just a beautiful 2 gray hills. It's made by a weaver by the name of Evelyn George. It's just a beautiful 2 gray. And she has the most beautiful sheep. She has all these colors, and this is all natural shades of wool, except the black in the border and a little bit in the center. All these colors. She has the most wonderful flock of sheep that are beautiful colors. She's 96 now, and she still weaves very little pieces, nothing really, and they're sad, kind of, because she's one of our great weavers for years and years. So.
Do you know Clyde McBride?
Mm-mm.
He teaches veterinary science to
No, I'm not.
Shiprock,
I'm not familiar with that name. Shiprock's an hour from us, and so that's like being on the other side of the world, really. Yeah.
I noticed there's a brown line on the border. Can you explain that too?
Well, yeah, it's called a spirit trail, and so most people say, well, it's to let the evil spirits out. I ask who put them in the first place. So in my book, I have a part of a chapter on why they do this, and you know, I asked hundreds of weavers why they did it. And you know, the one answer that always won out over any was, my mother told me to do it. But basically the concept is, I'll get you in 1 second. Basically the concept, then they put everything in the rug. They put their heart and their soul and everything in the rug, and they don't want it to stay there. So it's called a spirit trail. So it's kind of a line, it's a connection from rug to rug to rug that they make. But you know, if you ask 10 people, you're going to get 27 answers. But I've asked weavers, and that's kind of the answer you get. So where was the question here?
That line is at the top of the weaving, at the end of the weaving,
That's the spirit line.
not at the beginning.
No, it's not. Well, it's always at the top, unless it's at the beginning. You know? So each lady has a different story. I went to see a weaver one time who was a really good weaver, and we'd loaned her money, and we went to see the rug. We take pictures of them when they're being done, and the spirit line was at the beginning. And I said, Selena, you must be a really confused weaver. And she kind of got offended and go, what do you mean? I said, that spirit line's supposed to be at the end. Don't you know anything? And she said, my mother said, again, the end of the conversation, that it lets all my creativity into my rug. So there's just another variation of it. So anyway, we had a couple of really fantastic weavers at Totalina, 2 of the best that ever lived. This is one of them. Her name was Bessie Minigoats, and she was a top prize winner for years and years. And you can just kind of see the quality of her designs and how absolutely perfect they are. And this is from probably about 1935 to 1945. Here's her spirit trail, and this is a storm pattern. And so, beautiful, beautiful rug, multiple borders. This was kind of her thing. So she would have been top prize winner at Gallup ceremonials for quite a few years, but unfortunately, another lady came along. And her name was Daisy Togglechi. She was a Totalina lady. She lived a couple miles down from the post. And Daisy, it's gotten pretty dark out right now. But Daisy was considered the best Navajo weaver that ever lived. She won Gallup ceremonials 25 years in a row.
First place. First prize.
First prize, yeah. But anyway, well, let's get it over here and see if we can get it where you can actually see. Yeah. Look at that, huh? Now, a normal Navajo rug is 30 to 50 wefts per inch if you're counting vertical. This is 130 wefts per inch. Yeah, she was the queen and first came up with the tapestry design. And literally, sometimes I passed it around, but I don't trust anybody anymore. But just get over where you could actually see how unbelievably, can I give you the job? Will you show it around and show the people how unbelievably fine her, and so she died in 1990, the first year I went out there starting to interview weavers. But her sister, she had a sister 2 years younger than her. Mildred Natani was her name. And Mildred told me that Daisy could spin wool while doing dishes. Because her wool was spun. And that's all hand spun. That's straight from the sheep, hand spun wool. So pretty impressive. Okay? Okay. You're right. All right. I got the coolest story I've ever found with a Navajo rug. All of you that want to leave can leave. I'll tell the story to myself. But if you want to wait just a few minutes, I'm going to tell you a story you won't believe. So you want to get me the blanket? So I had mentioned my first show was at the Utah Museum of Natural History in 1980 that I curated. And it was all on the whole Southwest weaving tradition. And so the director there, Donald Haig, became a very good friend, and he sent me to a lot to the Mormon families that had kind of helped take care of the Navajos. And so I got a lot of really neat things from all over Utah. He'd send me out dirt roads in southeastern Utah. He'd find things in Salt Lake City, and he liked me and trusted me and sent me on a lot of pretty good wild goose chases. This was the best one. So I went to see this family. The early family name was Summerhays. And so we looked at the different color serapes. This is the only blue background serape I've ever seen. I was so impressed by how beautiful it was, and all the bayeta and the greens and the kind of orangey and yellow colors are all bayeta too. But I was sitting in the living room and talking to them and everything, and they go, well, there's kind of a story with the blanket. And I'm going, okay. Now, I'm going to say the story a little bit of a silly way to you can kind of, thank you very much. And so, but you'll get the idea, okay? So they were part of the Mormon families to settle southeastern Utah. So they were down there in the, whenever that was, 1850s, 1860s, which is how the blanket really dates. And the men were outside working, the women were inside cooking and everything. And a group of Utes rode up. And so they knew the Utes and everything, there was some communication with them and everything, but they tucked all the women in the log cabin, and the men went out there with their guns and to, talk to them, see what they wanted. And so the Utes asked for guns. We need some guns. And they said, well, if we give you guns, you might shoot us. It's probably not a good idea, guys. Sorry. They said, oh, no, you're men of God. We're not going to shoot you. You're not who we want. We want the guns for the Navajos. So we use them against the Navajos. And they said, well, we kind of like the Navajos, And so, which they kind of adopted that tribe. And so it kind of reached a stalemate, and they weren't going to, the Mormon men weren't going to give them any guns, but they had their own. And so the head of the Ute tribe kind of waves to somebody in the band, and he comes up and he has a Navajo blanket, that Navajo blanket, and a bundle. And he takes the bundle, and he throws it on the ground in front of the Mormon men, and opens it up, and there's a baby in there. And it was a baby they'd just stolen from the Navajo. And they said, if you don't give us guns, we're going to kill the baby. And they're going, well, we don't, we can't really deal with that. So one of the Utes comes up with a big club, and he's about ready to club the little baby. And the women all come running out of the log cabin going, no, you can't kill the baby. They can't kill the baby. And the men were going, well, we're not giving them guns. And so they finally agreed to give them 2 guns for the blanket and the baby. And they raised the baby till she was about 15 years old, and she ran off with an Indian kid that came through one time, but they kept the blanket. Is that an amazing story? It's the best one I ever heard. So it was just a great story. So I've had that since the 80s, I think. That's when I got it. So that is what we call provenance.
What kind of guns were they?
I don't know, yeah, right. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. We really enjoyed it.
So thank you, Mark. Again, another amazing installation, and I learned unbelievable amount every time. Thank
Good.
you.
Yeah, we shifted up too, you know.
Yeah, and I want to mention, in addition to Mark's knowledge that you've seen here tonight and building what is arguably the most preeminent American Southwest textile and Northern Mexican textile collection, Mark has also created the largest textile database that exists.
On Saltillos.
On Saltillos.
On Saltillos,
But when
right.
you combine all the other textiles
Yeah,
as
well,
well,
we have a little more information about them too.
yeah, it turns into a pretty impressive database. And the long-term goal is to bring all of this into a public collection so that all of this material information will be accessible for generations to come. So that'll
Was
be
that a plug?
just a little. That'll be a significant contribution to the humanities and the legacy that these weavings represent to our cultural traditions. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for coming. There is food still available in the Research Center, the Luna Chapel, and the main exhibition space will be open till 6, so feel free to linger. The next talk is February 14th by Juanita Lavadie on weaving in El Valle, Northern New Mexico weaving traditions. So please come back for that, and thank you.
Thank you.